some wonky stuff going on with the graphics and everything today for reasons that are totally beyond me. But in any event, welcome to Resistance Live. It's May 22nd. So the big bad MAGA murder budget bill passed the House early this morning. Very bad news. Very, very bad news. Now, I have to tell you all, as those of you who are longtime followers know, and if you did your Schoolhouse Rock, you know, this is not the end of the story. The budget bill has to pass the Senate next. The Senate bill will doubtless be different from the House, and then the House will have to vote again. However, I want to make a few things really clear here. We have got to be as loud as humanly possible today about this bill, because not only does the bill cut 13 million Americans off of Medicaid, not only does it cut all sorts of things from the social safety net, like SNAP benefits and emergency benefits and all sorts of other things that are of deep concern to people, it also includes some very dangerous provisions that are, I don't even know how to put it, totally irrelevant to anything having to do with the budget, that would fundamentally decimate really important areas of protection for most Americans. This budget bill still contains the provisions that prevent state AI regulation. Okay. This, again, is something really disturbing from the standpoint of, for instance, future employment, from the standpoint of things like whether or not you're going to get reliable weather information, from the standpoint of whether or not the information that you're getting from the news is AI generated or fact checked. There's all sorts of reasons why that particular provision is really distressing. In addition to that, there is still a provision in this budget that would allow the sale of gun silencers to regular Americans. This is a prohibition that has been in place under law for a very long time at this point. Not anymore if it passes the Senate in the same condition. That, by the way, would essentially allow anybody in an open carry state to be carrying a gun with a silencer. Don't ask me why the GOP wants this. I have some theories, but honestly, terribly scary stuff. And of course, the last zinger, which I have been flagging for the last few days, which of course you all should know about, is that there is a provision in the bill that passed the House that would prevent the federal courts from finding folks in contempt for violating injunctions and temporary restraining orders. This one is perhaps one of the most disturbing aspects of this bill to me, because what it essentially would do, it would allow the Trump administration to violate any number of these preliminary injunctions, permanent injunctions, or temporary restraining orders that have been entered by the courts for their most outrageous illegal activity, and there would be no recourse for the violation of those orders in the federal courts. So, for instance, let's just say hypothetically, Supreme Court says you can't deport anybody under the Alien Enemies Act. Already done, by the way. What happens next? They deport people under the Alien Enemies Act anyway. Is there the availability of contempt to hold Kristi Noem or Tom Homan or Marco Rubio in contempt of court for violating that order? Not under this bill. So essentially, it's a get out of jail free card for anybody in the Trump administration for violating permanent, preliminary, or temporary restraining orders or injunctions if it passes the Senate in its current form. That is terrifying to me. And I just have to say that, as a lawyer, I know there's been a lot of debate about the survival of the rule of law, lots of debates about whether or not we're in a constitutional crisis. You all know my thoughts on that. But fundamentally, this particular provision will end the separation between the judiciary and the executive branch to essentially the point that the laws won't matter anymore. It can't pass like this. I can't emphasize it enough. It cannot pass like this. And that's leaving aside the fact that literally people are going to die. All credit to Anat Shankar-Osorio for terming it the MAGA murder budget. She, who is, the most effective progressive messaging strategist out there these days, she's right. This budget will kill people if it passes. It's no joke. People will starve. Babies will starve. And families that are currently surviving on food stamps will have no way to feed their families. It's outrageous. And why are they doing all of this? So that billionaires can have more tax cuts. That's the justification. It's going to add billions of dollars to the federal deficit. And they are doing it all so the extremely rich in this country can get even richer. It kind of doesn't get any more morally despicable than this. So your assignment today, which is not optional, if you're listening to this broadcast, there won't be a test, but I'm telling you right now, I consider this not optional, is to call your representatives and your senators and tell them all the reasons why this bill has to be defeated. Your representatives still need phone calls, even though it passed the House, because it passed by one vote. And I'm going to remind you, Jerry Connolly just died yesterday. We've had 3 Democrats die in office in this term so far. Okay. This would not have passed. If some of the oldest folks in the Democratic Party had stepped aside and allowed a younger Democrat to run. That's a conversation for another day, but I'm just going to make it really clear. It passed by 1 vote. That means that it is defeatable if it passes the Senate and returns to the House. So you must call both your representative and your senators, like ASAP, and tell them all the reasons why this bill can't pass. If you have family members on Medicaid, tell them that. If you yourself are on Medicare, tell them that. If you know people in your community or you yourself benefit from SNAP benefits, if you know people who will starve to death, if those SNAP benefits are taken away from them, you need to call and advocate for those people. Okay? This is a moment where the poorest among us, disabled people, others of, the working classes, who, by the way, are like multi-diverse. We have to remember this. Not all working people in this country are white, notwithstanding what Democratic and Republican consultants want you to think. Those people need us to advocate for them, like today. And if you are one of them, you must do that as well. Like, please pick up the phone and call, okay? It is critically important that you do not drop the ball on this, because the vote in the Senate is going to come fast and furious. And if this passes, it will be disaster for the poorest and most vulnerable people in this country. So I really want you to absolutely make your voice heard. And I just have to say that even if you have a lame GOP rep, like by the name of Dan Newhouse, for instance, as is being mentioned in the comments, you must call. They have to hear from us, regardless of whether they like what they're hearing or not. Okay? This is not a moment to not call, even if they don't pick up the phone. And I'm going to remind you of something else. If you can't get through on the main line in DC, call the local offices. Call all of them. Because often there are staff working in the local offices who will answer the phones if they've got everything routing to voicemail in DC. Okay? You must make your voices heard. And I have to say this. I know for some of you, you have representatives and senators where it feels like you're beating your head against a brick wall. Do not stop. Because they are going to assume that there will be no consequences to them for doing this if they don't hear from us. You as a constituent need to call and say, there is no way in hell that I will ever vote for you if you allow this bill to pass. And I will make sure that everybody in my community will never vote for you if you allow this bill to pass. Because it's outrageous. Because people are going to die. Because it is the MAGA murder budget. That's what it is. It's the MAGA murder budget. It's going to kill people. I will also just say that, one of the other things that people need to think about here, because I said this last night on Blue Sky, I'm just going to say it again. You all know that I've been touting mutual aid here since like the earliest days of the pandemic, really since before the pandemic began. One of the things that people need to realize is that if any version of this passes through the Senate with the kinds of provisions that are currently in it, and it is then passed in the House and becomes law, we're going to need mutual aid more than ever. Okay. And that includes things like food banks. It includes things like community gardens. It includes things like outreach to elders, because, by the way, Meals on Wheels has already been cut thanks to Doge. It's going to need things like community health clinics for people who have no money for medical care. And these are all things that you can start to support where you live. There's many, many ways of engaging in mutual aid. Some of them are directly with your neighbors. Some of them are through organizations in your community that are already doing that work. I'm just going to remind you that faith organizations have things like pastoral care teams that are there specifically to check on people who are sick and ailing and housebound. We're going to need so much more of that. Okay. And there's going to be a real need for like those of us who care to pick up the slack if this gets through in anything like its current form. It's insanely dangerous. Like I can't overstate how much my heart breaks for what this is going to mean for families and elders and disabled people in this country. It's unspeakable to me that this is where we are. So please make your voices heard. And I will also remind everybody, mutualaidhub.org is a clearinghouse of mutual aid groups nationwide. Not every mutual aid group is on there. I'll just mention this. So you should go look at it. And if you can't find a mutual aid group near where you are, please make sure you get your Google on anyway and see what kind of mutual aid groups exist in your area. All right. Because that is a clearinghouse, but not every mutual aid group has registered with it. And it's really critically important to know who's doing the work where you live. Please also remember that forms of mutual aid are things like shelters, right? For domestic violence victims, shelters for the unhoused, places that, do soup kitchens are a version of mutual aid, right? You can donate, you can volunteer, right? And make sure when you're donating, donating money is awesome. And I'm like all in favor of donating money. It's also really good to be able to donate goods and services and time. Okay. So just critically important to be very clear-eyed about what we're facing down, and also make sure that you've got your network set up right now. Don't hesitate. If you have not been in mutual aid before, now is the moment. Now, not tomorrow, now. Because the second this bill passes, we're going to be in real trouble. Okay. We have to talk about some very interesting developments in yesterday's court case that we were talking about literally live while I was on the air, about the people who have been extraordinarily rendered, kidnapped by ICE to South Sudan. So when we were on the air yesterday, the plane had landed in Djibouti, and Judge Brian Murphy from the District Court of the District of Massachusetts was on the bench, and there was an ongoing hearing with the DOJ about the violation of the order, okay? Lo and behold, yesterday, Judge Murphy entered a couple of orders in that case. The first makes very, very clear that this action of putting these men on a plane and sending them to South Sudan is in direct violation of Judge Murphy's earlier order. Next, what he did is he entered an order that requires the provision. First of all, they're not allowed to release them from U.S. custody. They have to provide the men on this airplane with the same access to legal services that they would have if they were inside the United States, including translators. And a credible fear interview has to be conducted in private within the next 15 days. And what that requires is an interview with legal representation on behalf of these men. And that legal representation has to be of the quality of the class representation in that case, meaning they have to be entitled to the best class action lawyers in America with translators. And they will be asked whether or not they have a credible fear of harm. I mean, this sounds like a no-brainer, but it's a requirement under immigration law for being removed from the United States to a country in the middle of a civil war, where literally the detention facilities are stacked trailers on top of each other in 100-degree heat. They also have the option, of course, to return them to the United States to conduct these interviews. But that is what the order says. Now, the interesting thing about this ruling was that it was under no uncertain terms, totally clear that the administration was in direct violation of the prior order. And during the hearing, Judge Murphy said, it is left to be seen whether or not this is criminal contempt. That's for another day. So for everybody yesterday who was flipping out, which, just pisses me off to no end, that he didn't enter criminal contempt right away. I have to remind everyone that criminal contempt requires an evidentiary hearing. And that means that witnesses have to be brought to testify. So one of the things that Judge Murphy has done now, which is really significant, is he has ordered the government to provide a list of the individuals who were involved in this deportation. If they do not provide this, he's got other options, but that list is now mandatory under order so that he can give notice to the individuals that they can be held in criminal contempt. Okay. This is all very significant. And I just, I have to say, I know everybody's like, it hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. It hasn't happened yet. He's got to check the boxes, or if he holds people in criminal contempt, it's going to be overturned. Okay. The other thing is he has a civil contempt option here, which is really important because why? Civil contempt cannot be subject to a presidential pardon. Very important. Okay. So the judge has to make very strategic decisions about what he's going to do here as a result of the administration's violation of his prior order. Okay. And there's other shenanigans underway in other cases that are raising very serious probability of contempt as well. For instance, the Department of Defense sent a flight containing people to Guantanamo, then transferred the custody of those people to the Department of Homeland Security so they could be rendered to a third-party country. The reason why they did this is because there's another order in which the Department of Defense is not a defendant, but the Department of Homeland Security is, and they're claiming, therefore, that they didn't violate the court's order, which, by the way, is bullshit, all right? The fact that, like, the initial flight was commandeered by DOD doesn't mean that DHS, which was involved, arguably, in a conspiracy to violate the court's order, shouldn't be held in contempt of court. So there's a lot of moving pieces here, a lot of moving pieces. And also, Brian Murphy, just so everyone is aware, has ordered the DOJ to produce the names of the people who were on that plane so that they can be identified. So we have like very fast moving stuff happening here out of the District of Massachusetts. The good news for now is that those men may not be released from U.S. custody. Now, whether or not the administration chooses to do that, given that they're wildly defying the law left, right, and center right now, we shall see. But I will tell you, Judge Murphy essentially read the DOJ lawyers yesterday the riot act on this, literally was from the bench telling them that, like, not using the word bullshit, but about as close as you can see a judge go, right? Meritless. That argument is meritless. This argument is without any legitimate basis. Those were the words that were being used by the judge. So the DOJ is in deep trouble, and so are all the people who were involved in this particular attempt at third-party country rendition. And the other thing I will just say about this, because, you know, it's like, it's worth saying this even though I shouldn't have to. Marco Rubio claimed state secrets in terms of who was deported. And then an agency of the federal government yesterday released photographs and criminal histories, allegedly, of the men who were on this plane and claimed that they were child molesters and murderers. I'm just going to point something out, okay? Child molesters and murderers, whether they are U.S. citizens or not, are entitled to due process inside the United States of America. Just because you commit a crime doesn't mean you don't have due process. And this is one of the things that is particularly disturbing about this, is that they seem to be playing a propaganda game where they say, look at this horrible person who did this horrible thing. Don't you American people think that that person deserves to be sent to a war-torn country in the middle of nowhere that they're not from and where they don't speak the language and where they will probably die? And I'm just going to tell you, I have very strong feelings about the criminal justice system in America, which is an incredibly powerful tool of oppression. The answer to that is no. No. No matter what you do, you have a right to due process inside the United States of America. That's one of the things that makes us a functioning democracy, sort of, right? I mean, I'm not going to claim that, like, it's ever been fully functional with regard to criminal justice. But that said, no matter how bad these people are, this could be frickin' Jeffrey Dahmer. You cannot deport someone to a third-party country, and you cannot kidnap them off the streets and send them outside of the United States without a hearing. You cannot do it. So this in and of itself is a crime against humanity, as we discussed yesterday. We are at the point right now where, when this is all over, however long it takes for this regime to fall, we will absolutely be talking about Nuremberg-style trials for these violations of crimes against humanity and international law. And, you know, at the moment, what we are waiting for finally is for the hammer to drop on Trump officials, which I'm just going to tell you is coming. Like, I see no way, given what Brian Murphy did yesterday from the bench, that we will not see some form of contempt against the Trump administration as a result. And, you know, one thing I just want to warn you all about: fines are a version of contempt. And something that can happen here, if there is not jail time, is this. You are assessed $100,000. You, official of the Trump administration, are assessed $100,000 in fines. And for every day that you do not return these people to the United States, that fine will double. That's kind of fun. That's an option that's possible. So again, let's see what happens with this. And by the way, I'm just going to tell you something else. The courts have enforcement means for fines that are not collected. They can attach assets. They can attach bank accounts. They can attach real property, like somebody's home. So we're in the realm right now where there's going to be an accelerating series of consequences for what's happening. And we don't know what those are going to look like yet. But I will tell you that I don't think Judge Brian Murphy is going to let this off the hook. Not at all. I mean, he was mad yesterday, like really, really mad. And, any form of appeal that we see from this has to be grounded in the evidence. But I'm going to tell you, I don't think there's any debate. I don't think there's going to be any legitimate debate that what they did was in direct violation of a court order. Okay, we did have some good news yesterday, which is that another U.S. district court found that the Trump administration had broken the law when it invaded the U.S. Institute of Peace and took it over with Doge and all those minions. This is very good news because, as you all remember, USIP is not actually a government agency. This is one of the things that made this all crazy. And this was one of the actions that was undertaken because USIP had done some work in South Africa, and this was particularly like a petty spat on behalf of Elon Musk to try to like completely undercut a non-governmental organization that was doing really good work. Yesterday, the head of USIP was able to return to the building and get access to it thanks to the court order. And of course, the Trump administration immediately appealed it to the Court of Appeals. We will have to see how this one rides out as well. But again, not an agency under the control of the executive branch. So this is a situation that is quite a bit less fair, meaning like none of it's fair and none of it's just to go into agencies and randomly fire people, and they're not legally allowed to do that. And the Trump administration has lost on that like hundreds of times. But USIP isn't even in that situation. So I don't think this appeal is really going to stand much of a chance, but I'm conveying the good information because, sometimes we all need a pep talk. Okay, yesterday, we saw Trump absolutely humiliated in the Oval Office with the president of South Africa, where Trump was spouting conspiracy theories, literally like the worst depths of the white supremacist internet, about white Afrikaners being murdered in South Africa, which is a lie. Like, I just want to state this very overtly. These are lies. They are fabricated stories. And in fact, the president of South Africa said very clearly, while we have crime in our country like any other country, that crime does not disproportionately fall on white farmers, period. And yet Trump kept going on. And then the president of South Africa said, I'm sorry, I don't have a plane to give you, as if that would like assuage the situation. And Trump said, well, if you had a plane to give the U.S. Air Force, I would take it. Speaking of which, yesterday, the U.S. Air Force did in fact take custody of the infamous $400 million jet from Qatar. A bill was introduced yesterday to try to stop that plane, any plane from a foreign entity being used as Air Force One. And that was filibustered by a member of the Senate, the Republican member of the Senate. So huge security concerns there as well. Plus, we now have, like international leaders pillorying and humiliating and mocking the U.S. president for his obvious corruption while he's spouting conspiracy theories from the worst depths of the internet. It's really bad. Okay, so like that happened yesterday also. All right, this morning, speaking of good news, we have some actually very good news, which seems like it might have been accidental. But it's good news out of the Supreme Court. So you all will remember that several weeks ago, there was oral argument on the case involving whether or not public school funds could be used to fund religious charter schools in Oklahoma. And you all will remember that, the Oklahoma Board of Ed is run by this like really horrendous guy who thinks that like, no Black history, no LGBTQ history should ever be taught in schools, who, has run roughshod over libraries and just all sorts of horrible things. Okay, so the ruling in that case that was before the Supreme Court came out this morning. Justice Amy Coney Barrett recused herself from that case, and we don't yet know why. There's some suspicion that it's because she has a longstanding affiliation with Notre Dame University. Sorry, not the cathedral in Paris. With Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is a religious college. Okay. And so her longstanding affiliation with them, and perhaps I think she has some kind of leadership role potentially on their board, she stepped away from the case. So that meant that there were only 8 Supreme Court justices that could decide the case. The case split 4-4. And here's a little Supreme Court knowledge that you all probably aren't aware of. When the Supreme Court ties, the lower court decision stands. And the lower court decision in this case held that public funds could not be used in Oklahoma to fund religious charter schools. So This is a win. And I think it's a really good win. And, we don't know who voted in what way because it was a per curiam decision. So all we know is ACB was not a part of it, and we don't know how the votes came out otherwise. Obviously, like 3 of the votes against using that money are obviously the Liberals, but we don't know who the swing vote was. And so I'm going to take that win. I'm just absolutely going to take that win because that's a big one. And there were a lot of people really, really worried about the end of the separation of church and state with regard to that case. It lives for another day. Hooray. All right. That's it for today on the news. I'm going to remind you all, make your calls today to the Senate. Please do not neglect to make your calls. Do your best to make sure that you flood those phone lines because this budget is so profoundly dangerous. And I can't believe this is where we are, but it would be way better for us to lose some of these provisions and if people stand up and lose some of these cuts from the final bill than to have anything like what just passed the House, passed the Senate. And so we've got to fight on this one. Please be loud. Make your phone calls. It's okay to be emotional. Be polite to the interns who answer the phone, but share your views on this. And it's okay to be outraged, okay? Because it's outrageous. So please make those phone calls today. Let's make sure we get it done. You can also call the Capitol switchboard. Oh, don't quote me on this. I think it's 202-224-3121. Somebody should tell me in the notes if that's correct. I think that's the main Capitol switchboard number, which I should have buried in my memory no matter what. But you can also call the main Capitol switchboard number and ask to speak to your senator if you do not know the direct dial, and they will connect you. Okay, but you can also Google this and look it up. And if you look up any senator, you're going to find not just their straight number in DC, you're also going to find their local office numbers, which you may need if you can't get through in DC, as I said earlier. You can also, by the way, use the 5 Calls app if you are interested in getting a script that's very easy to use. So please download that app. That makes it a lot easier if you're looking for a script to make your phone calls that way. All right. Okay. Lots of love to everyone. Please like this broadcast. Don't forget to subscribe if you like what we're doing here. Drop me a comment if you're watching on the replay because it tells the algorithm you like this broadcast. I will also just remind you all that if you are doing any form of community organizing, we have a free guide on how to lead for change right now without burning out. It's already linked in the show notes, and I'll drop it into the comments after the broadcast. Please go download that because it really will walk you through. First of all, it's beautiful, but it'll also walk you through how to do all the work that you need to do right now to save lives and make a difference without frying yourself for the long haul. Okay, really important. Okay, that's it for today, my friends. I will catch you all back here tomorrow at regular time. Reminder to our Patreon subscribers, there is no progressive coffee hour tomorrow afternoon because it's Memorial Day weekend and my kids are off school, okay? And there is a new educational video coming on Monday, and I will be back live on Tuesday, but I will see you all here tomorrow at regular time. All right, my friends, have a wonderful rest of your Thursday. Lots of love to all of you. Take care of one another. Take care of your communities, please. And I hope everybody makes their phone calls today. All right, I'll see you soon. Bye.